Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kate Miller. I'm Head of Marketing here at Ecosulis. If this is the first time you've been introduced to us, then as a brief summary, and absolutely no pressure because our CEO is sat on the webinar too. So here at Ecosulis, we are dedicated to recovering nature by designing and delivering efficient and scalable nature-based solutions for people and planet. So welcome to our river, pond and wetland restoration webinar. We're really excited to have so many of you join us today. And thank you to everybody that has shared the webinar series with colleagues or kind of have emailed through event questions already, which is great. It was really, really great to connect with you all. So our Senior Project Manager, Nick May, will be presenting today. His presentation will last around 30 minutes. And I'd just like to encourage you all to please put your questions in the chat. That's everything from me. So I'll just hand over to Nick. Thanks.
Hi all. I'm Nick, as you can see from my name, Senior Project Manager here at Ecosulis. I've been with the company for 9 years now. Started off as a lowly admin temp on a 6-month temporary contract, and for some unknown reason they decided to keep me. So as you can tell, today's webinars on wetland restoration, whether that be coastal, river, lakes, ponds, streams or brooks. Whatever it is we're restoring, it will have a marked improvement on the biodiversity of said area, as well as all the other benefits that I shall go into shortly. So why restore? Yeah, I mean, for millions of years, our waterways have been the lifeblood of the planet, and this obviously is as it is at the moment, and will continue to be so and forevermore. You know, its inhabitants, and not just us humans, are dependent on water, whether it be fresh or salt or otherwise. This is the only reason why the planet is inhabited, as far as we're aware at this moment in time. Although if anyone does have any evidence of aliens, give me a shout. Quite interested in that. So restoration of wetlands is the fastest way of improving biodiversity and making the world a better place for various different reasons I'm about to come on to. So yes, rivers especially, and streams and channels in Britain. You know, I don't think there isn't one in the country that hasn't been straightened, canalised, channelled, you know, diverted. You know, we've been doing it since the Middle Ages. Fortunately enough, you know, it's not normally the go-to these days. In fact, as many of us know here on this webinar, that, you know, ever increasingly we're reconnecting the watercourses to their paleo channels, to their floodplains, for different reasons, but obviously where they've been straightened, the main issues that it creates, you know, is the massive increase in nutrients and sediments. They've clogged them up, they've become eutrophic, moribund, you know, and in several cases, you know, in many cases rather, they're just full of dark algae and sewage fungus. You know, I mean, that's not entirely, you know, it's not that bleak, but it's a fairly bleak picture as we sit here today. The quote in the top right hand corner I grabbed out of the Independent that a colleague put on my desk on Monday, and it kind of highlights how bad things actually are in the UK. Not just watercourses, but just our whole, you know, our whole nature. You know, we've degraded to such an extent now, where, you know, we're sitting in the bottom 10th of every nation in the world, and that's, you know, and that's why we're here, and that's why we do what we do, is to try and you know, reverse some of this, and, you know, take us out of the bottom 10th. You know, let's aim to be a bit higher, because, yeah, the race at the bottom is definitely not where we want to be these days. So the benefits of wetlands, which ties into why we want to restore. I mean, wetlands are massively important to, you know, to the world. you know, not just in terms of their carbon sequestration. As you can see from the screen, there is, you know, they will sequester 3 to 5 times more than tropical forests. You know, they store huge volumes of carbon per acre, depending on what they are. Yeah, they provide a variety of benefits, services, food growth, energy, electricity generation, water for drinking, but they also provide a social benefit, and that value, you know, is valued at $35 trillion. You know, so they, you know, the benefits of restoring these and improving them is there to be seen. You know, and it really, you know, we can't underestimate, if we continue down this road of degrading them, whether through nutrients, sediments, or likewise, you know, we're going to end up in a slightly bigger mess than we already are. So yeah, we need to push, you know, and it needs to be pushed, you know, not just from the top, but from the bottom as well. You know, there's a lot of people on this call, you know, we're all doing our own thing, you know, whether it be the Wildlife Trust, the Rivers Trust, you know, we're all pushing towards the same goal of restoring these, and that has to continue. But I think there's probably more that we could do to join up our thinking. There's a really good example that I'll come on to shortly, of where there could be better joined up thinking. You know, and whilst I'm not saying we need to, you know, have a role to say in what someone else is doing in their wetland, but I think certainly there's a discussion to be had, especially when it comes to materials, that, you know, there needs to be a more joined up way of working. But you know, so I'll come on to that bit shortly. So restored waterways. I mean, obviously, these are just my views, you know, and my view on the world. And obviously, these are my, you know, these are what I see as the 4 main points to restoring waterways. You know, increasing the biodiversity, you know, hugely important, that one. Cleaner water, you know, probably even more important than the increased biodiversity. You know, you clean the water, biodiversity will come back, you know, by default. You know, if you haven't got a river full of sediment and nutrients, you know, then you'll start, you know, nature will do what nature does. You know, but it decreases flood risk. You know, there's been a lot of drive over the last couple of years regarding natural flood management. Park that one because that's my next slide. And as I already mentioned, the increase in social and economic benefits. So that's kind of where we're at in my head anyway. So natural flood management. The main points on natural flood management, you know, it's basically, you know, copying beavers in a nutshell. You know, they're a great example of what to do. Obviously, you know, beavers aren't necessarily right in all cases, but hey, we can certainly copy, and we have been copying them. You know, there's a huge amount that can be done to limit the flood risk at a you know, further lower down the catchment. And the more we do further up the catchment, it's a great way. It's a significantly cheaper way of managing flood risk than building hard civils through the centre of towns and cities. Obviously, there's always going to be a need for hard civils, but you know, maybe, you know, as more and more natural flood management processes are put into areas higher up the catchment, the EA should be able to maybe just, you know, roll back some of that massive capital expenditure, you know, which obviously then has its bonuses, because then you're not producing more carbon, you know, and all that, you know, from concrete production, all that sort of stuff. So natural flood management is not just about stuff higher up the catchment. It can be quite close to towns and cities. But the main drivers are, you know, blocking rivers. You know, that tree here, like that. That was, yeah, so this was taken at Enderby. We did 3 sites for the Environment Agency as part of their pilot project. You know, that is felling a rather large tree. That photo doesn't give it justice. You know, it was almost 1 metre in diameter. It was about 800 mil. But that was felled directly across the floodplain, sorry, across the River Soar from Narborough Bog. The other 2 sites that I'll come on to were Enderby and Croft. But it's just showing that we're no longer afraid of blocking channels. You know, and actually there's a lot more to be done about putting stuff in the rivers. You know, pushing it out into the floodplains higher up in the catchment. You know, but then it's also then holding that water back within that floodplain. You know, so you can put in blockages within the floodplain. You know, whether that be bunds or withy bunds or oxbow bunds or whatever it may be. You know, woody debris. Woody debris is a great one. You know, but there's a whole range of different processes and, you know, stuff that can be done now that, you know, we at Ecosulis, the agency, and all you guys out there are already doing. You know, so, you know, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel, but it certainly shows that we are, you know, we're following on from beavers because they do a really good job. They've been doing it for, you know, thousands of years. So I talked about the River Soar. Obviously, the previous slide showed the large in-channel feature. So the agency were given a pot of funding, which we at Ecosulis found ourselves part of, helping them look at 15 different sites, doing the buildabilities of it, and then 3 of those were then taken to construction. We were working alongside Atkins. Atkins were the lead designers on this, you know, and they came up with some really good ideas, you know, and you know, but we helped them develop those ideas. We changed materials around. You know, some of the stuff they wanted coir rope, as you can see in here. Other bits was like, well, you can't, you know, if you use coir rope, then you're going to have, you know, it's going to degrade very quickly. You'd be better off just tying some of it in with steel. Okay, not entirely environmentally friendly, but certainly lasts a lot better than coir rope is. One interesting thing is the coir rope at Narborough, but given how wet it is, it's a triple SI, it's a bog, and obviously it's degraded very quickly. You know, it is that the volunteers. So obviously the main CapEx project was done, and it was handed over to the Wildlife Trust to carry on managing, and they've ended up having to replace the coir rope a couple of times because it is degrading. So, you know, it's about trying to find those balances between what's right, what we're trying to do, and what we're trying to achieve, and actually, is using steel rope, you know, environmentally friendly, or do we want something that's going to last a little bit longer? So it's all, you know, it's a balancing act. But as part of the project, you know, we didn't do a huge amount of tree planting, which for me is quite good. I'm not a big fan of tree planting, not from a project management point of view. I find it quite, it's quite monotonous. Not very, you know, it's not very in there. Obviously, it has massive benefits to tripping the water up and slowing the flow as it comes down through the floodplain. But you know, there were some, you know, they were all salix species, and they were actually planted in and around this pond just off camera. It's down here somewhere. But it had, you know, it's all about slowing the flow through the floodplain. You know, so as part of the works, as you can see, you know, there were 2,000 cubic meters of soil excavated, 1,000 cube on each. In this photo, this was at Croft, the one with the pond. All the material stayed on site, was spread over local land, and then was used to create this bund across the back. Obviously, you've already seen the large Inchannel tree that was installed on the previous slide. Then there was the photo in the top left up here shows the oxbow bund, and they're trying to, you know, so this is an offline channel that goes on online when it floods, when the soil rises. But the whole point of that is to try and recreate it and get it to hold more water. Hence the big pile of brash and log that went in there. And that was a good example of where steel rope was used as opposed to coir rope. Then there were a number of widdy bundles that were placed across the floodplain through the woodland, like this photo in the bottom corner. So it's basically just recreating beavers in a nutshell, which was really good. But sorry, didn't mean to do that. Apologies. But I mentioned about joined up thinking. The one problem that came out of the excavation on the other side, which was Enderby, was there was 1,000 cube of soil that came out. Perfectly good soil, been soil tested, no nasties in there, but it had to go to landfill. And it was used as capping material, for landfill, which isn't a bad thing. No one wants a landfill, you've got to cap them somehow. But the one problem that the agency had is they couldn't find anyone who wanted 1,000 cubic meters of spoil. And it makes you wonder that if we as a group were a little bit more, instead of just looking at what we're doing, if we spoke to our neighbours down the road in the next county or the county over and say, look, I've got 1,000 cube of soil here, all clear, here's the soil sampling reports, what can we do? Have you got use for it? Because maybe they're doing something in the higher floodplain, but they're not excavating, but they want to create a bund. And that, I think, will be the key to helping the natural flood management processes move on, especially when we're dealing with excavations. Fortunately enough, most excavations do stay on site, but there are times where that's just not possible for one reason or another, whether it be a flood risk that the EA don't want, or the landowner doesn't want it, because obviously a lot of our work is on other people's land, and they just don't want it. So you kind of have to, it's a bit of a balancing act in that regard. But hopefully there's we can come up with a plan amongst ourselves and a bit more joined up thinking in terms of doing that. Nutrients. Everyone loves a good story about nutrients and nutrient neutrality. Another big topic at the moment. Everywhere you turn around, it seems to be nutrient neutrality is the big one. It's almost like natural flood management has sort of gone over there now, and we've done that, and everyone's like nutrient neutrality. No dramas with that. But it's quite strange because this is one of the first big projects I ever worked on with Ecosulis. I joined in 2014, as I said, I've been in 9 years now. But previously it had all been, admin type stuff. So this was the first big thing that I'd been involved in. This in Vale Lake, and but as part of that, we were asked by the EA to come up with a design for a massive floating reed bed. So they had increased the flood barrier or flood wall along the River Trent at Attenborough Nature Reserves, and the water levels that they had were, a lot of it was fine, but there were areas where it was too deep, mainly around Church Pond, and around this, as you can see, is very much around an outflow. You've already got established reeds and as such here, but they wanted to do more, and this formed part of a bigger scheme. It was about 300 square meters in total, I think it was at the time. It's a big project, a lot of coir parrots. And at that point, as far as I'm aware, I stand corrected, back in those days, it was the biggest floating reed bed in the UK. I stand corrected. If someone knows more, then cool, give me a shout. But as I'm aware, that's what it was. But the advantage about floating reed beds is it allows you to pull the nutrients out in deeper water, and then allows deeper root establishment from the base, and eventually, some of those reed beds, they were yeah, they were best part of a metre above the bottom, and they have rooted into the bottom because of the nutrient, you know, the root mass. The root mass has pulled itself down, and dragged itself down, and created itself into in below the bottom of the floating reed bed. And that's kind of what you want, because then you're creating a whole new reed bed in water that you shouldn't be creating reed beds in. You know, reed beds are 300 mil, really, you know, max, maybe 400 if you're lucky. But you know, some of this was, you know, best part of a metre deep, so it has its huge benefits to do it. And you just allow, all you're doing is helping nature do what nature does best. And that, you know, for us was a really positive, you know, thing to see, that, you know, seeing the roots hit the bottom of the bed. We didn't just do floating reed beds at Attenborough. We did a whole range of other stuff. It was all part of the, as I said, the works on the River Trent. There was a whole range of maintenance that went done on the site. The original site had, you know, we planted 250,000 reeds. So a lot of those reeds in those previous pictures that you saw were planted originally. That was, I think it was like 2011, 2012, something like that they planted all those in. So all we were doing was helping those along. And then we also reused the reeds. You know, we translocated the reeds. Not a huge amount, but exactly the same reason as a floating reed bed. Areas that we couldn't put a floating reed bed in because of restrictions, as you can see in the top corner, the reed was translocated onto a pontoon, floated off, and then, you know, at the other end was manhandled off and into position. The guys didn't appreciate that one back in those days, that's for sure. But you know, it is what it is, and it, you know, and those reeds have established. In fact, one of the last bits of stuff that we did up at Attenborough was the translocation works, as well as, you know, the bridge and furrow works that the agency has created. You know, we helped manage that, planted 5,000 trees and a whole lot of grassland. So there was a whole load of stuff going on, for nutrient benefit, biodiversity benefit, and actually, as it's a nature reserve, it gets a huge amount of foot traffic. So the socioeconomic benefits that came out of what the agency did, and us and Jackson Civil Engineers, because they were doing the flood bank works, you know, everyone, you know, on that particular project, you know, really pulled together. And, you know, it's a wonderful place to go and visit. In fact, an old colleague sent me a picture the other day. I don't have it on Facebook, and it was a fox using the floating reed bed for hunting. I'm not sure that's entirely what we intended it for, but it just shows that, you know, nature is using it. So, you know, it's not just about nutrients and social, you know, it's about that nature is using it for its own ends. And for me, that's that's very much a massive bonus. So move on to another Midlands one. I seem to do a lot of work in the Midlands. Seems like you guys in the Midlands are all over this. I think the rest of us have got to catch up. So this was at Birmingham Uni, same year as we put the floating reed beds in. Not with a big excavator though. Picture in the top left-hand corner. The original plan was to put a standard revetment in. The whole point of this is a very public space. Gets a lot of, you know, there's four massive student accommodation blocks to the right over here, and then there's another two up the back here. So it gets a lot of footfall from students from the University of Birmingham, but it's also a public park. So you get a lot of members of the public that aren't students using it and enjoying it. Heavily silted. It's got one channel in and one channel out. The channel out goes into a triple SI. The channel in is just runoff, and, you know, it's got a huge amount of wildfowl. Hence the fencing that you'll see down here in this photo. And the aim of it was to create a revetment, pump the silt back in, and then plant it all up. one of the challenges that became apparent was the actual pond, that the lake was lined. No one knew about this until the university had dug up the planning drawings that were, you know, from back in the 50s. And it was like at that point it became apparent that we couldn't do a standard revetment. So we ended up installing a massive gabion structure across two sides of the bank. Yeah, so the outflow is here, the inflow is coming in here. So the whole point was this whole area was backfilled with silt from the internal side of the lake. As you can see here, with excavator was agitating the silt, and then it was being pumped back over the top of the revetment and into there and then planted up. So yeah, there were 16,000 plants that went in there once the works were done, years maintenance, and then it was left. However, what happened, so after we'd finished up, big heavy storm went through and tipped the gabions over. I'll tip the front section of the gabion over here. It wasn't much, about 10 meters. So whilst we were there, whilst we went back 4 years down the line, we uprighted those, refilled them, and then we also translocated a load of reeds because the reeds had become so well established, and the other marginals. It was like, well, let's take the opportunity to move them, because what had happened is the water had found its way. Yeah, so the reeds had established here, but actually the water was pushing itself around the outside. So we blocked that with reeds, just to help though, you know. So we put some of the silt in there, and then put the reeds on top to force the water through the reeds and not to find its own way. We've been back since and had a look, and it's done exactly that. So, you know, that worked a treat. Really happy with that. Yeah, so it came down really well, but ultimately the benefit on that was it's increased the biodiversity of the area. You know, it's more pleasant to look at, doesn't smell anymore, which is always a benefit. You know, and it's just, you know, improved the biodiversity of the site. You know, there's a lot more, unfortunately, a lot more wildfowl. Not that's a bad thing, but there is a lot more, you know, there's a lot more smaller wildfowl as opposed to your geeses and your swans. So it has massive benefits to it. It's one that I'm quite happy to say I put my hand up and did that one, especially using the amphib, because that was my first time having an amphib on site. You know, really enjoyed that one. So, I mean, boosting biodiversity, I mean, you know, we as a company and me personally, you know, regardless of what the job is, the end goal has to be about improving the biodiversity of the site. You know, everything else is a benefit, everything else is a bonus. You know, but I think, you know, the more that we can increase the biodiversity, it shows that what we're actually doing as a group is working. You know, and you know, just a list of wetland sites there. You know, Chris took that shot of the grass snake using the River Sowie. Down the bottom with the two smiley chaps is two of my guys. They're down at the River Sowie doing wetland planting last year. So, you know, it's all about how biodiversity increases from what we've done and what we do. And that for me is, you know, is ultimately one of the drivers for me. You know, if I can say that, you know, Clay's Lake being a great example of the adders coming back into an area because it was a plantation, you know, with a bit of heathland, but through the management that we've done on the site as part of the wetland planting and all the others, you know, the adder population there has increased. Which is a wonderful example. You know, and we talk too far. Yeah, we talk about the you know, the benefits of the socioeconomic benefits. I said I've already touched on Vale Lake. This one here is at Kingshurst Brook. As I said, I don't know what it is you guys in the Birmingham, the Midlands. You know, this is another Birmingham project. That we did on behalf of the Warwickshire Wildlife Trust. Very public space. Absolutely stank in the summer. but because of what the design that the WWT had come up with, and then that we implemented, and we changed on site. I mean, that's one of the keys, is having that collaboration when you're on sites. And then you can tweak changes, you can make changes, and that for me is is why it's so important that we keep the communication lines open. So what you're seeing here is is this stretch of this small brook connects onto the River Cole, and then it was eutrophic. There was a previous contractor had gone in, created an island. There was a whole load of plastic revetment across the top here. We took all of that out, replaced it with brushwood, and then increased the wet benches along here. And then we put a load of, there was about 300 tons of gravel that went into the wet benches and into the channel. The main driver, not only was it a socioeconomic benefit, but it was also fish passage coming off the river. They couldn't survive in what was a dead stream, basically. And just speeding it up and slowing it down, had massive benefits to fish. It's also quite, it's quite nice to sit and watch. This is supposed to be a video. It's not actually working. Don't know why. But just to stand there and watch for 5 minutes, just watch the water cascade over the rocks and the gravel was very therapeutic. As you can see, it was. We're in a post-COVID world, and more of us are looking to reconnect with nature if we haven't already. And just by standing there and watching the water ripple over the gravels, it's just what we needed. I mean, my guys didn't think so at the time. There was a lot of hard graft that went in that 200 metre section of the Kingshurst Brook. There was a lot of NFM features that went in there, hinged willows, deflectors and all that sort of stuff. And it was a little bit cold. It wasn't quite as cold as it was last week, but it was pretty damn cold. And it was hard graft. A couple of new starters in there as well. It was their first project. And it's great to see more and more people jumping on board what we're all trying to do, and and get their feet wet, so to speak. But just bringing it back to the topic, the benefits now is it doesn't smell. It's very pleasant to sit and watch. When we first started at Kingshurst, we had a local resident come up to us and said, "Oh, just leave the river alone." And by the time we'd finished, he'd seen what we'd done, and what the WWT had looked to, what they wanted it to be, and what it then was, And the same guy came back and was like, "You guys have done a great job," And that for me is it just sums up exactly the reason why, and the benefits that river restoration can bring to the public. Just slipping over to challenges. I've never had any wetland job that's been the same. Same concepts, different layouts, different access problems, weather. The bridge you can see in the middle there, that's Enderby. That's where that 1,000 cubic meters of soil came out. The river soar was particularly unhelpful when we were doing that. So this was just before COVID hit. So this was sort of January, February 2020, and the river decided it was going to rain a lot, and the river topped out. It was interesting actually, because we also hit the paleo channel here, which was also very good. So it also always had the whole point was it run wet and dry, but actually it's remaining wet all year round. but but it didn't help at this point. There we are trying to construct, a small pond, scrape, and the river keeps bursting its banks. So we ended up with a flooded compound for 7 days. So obviously the machines were all bunded up, fuel was all bunded up, so there was no issues there. But lessons learned. The welfare got flooded out. We left one night, came back the next day. It was like, oh, okay, we've got my welfare units underwater, not completely underwater. It'd gone through the door. But it leads you on to have those conversations about your accesses. And if you've got to use, if you've got to move 1,000 cubic meters of soil, how do you get it there? How do you get it off? In the top left-hand corner, there's all the guys at Auto Track, removing the trackway that had been in place at Enderby. Fortunately enough, that didn't get washed away because of the weight of it. But it's all these little things that we need to that we need to consider as we work through it. And also that bridge at Enderby, there's an ancient historic monument that's a Schedule 2 or Schedule 1 monument bridge. So we couldn't, literally they were changing the design of the pond on the day that we started. We were out there with Atkins, and we were like, yeah, no, right, we can't do that. No, we're going to do this bit. And it's having those collaborative approaches that help overcome those challenges. And obviously, you've got protected species, GCM being a great one, water vole being another. All of these, act as challenges, and it's about having those conversations and being a collaborative group. Whether you're designing in-house or building in-house, whatever it is, it's about being collaborative. Which leads me on to my next slide. And how do you overcome this? I mean, this is the team that was at Kingshurst, and that reed bed behind them is Vale Lake. So it gives you an idea as to what things can look like. Obviously that's the team that I had in at Kingshurst Brook. I talked about the collaborative approach between client, contractor, and designer. Great example at the River Soar, with the monument bridge, changing the design on the hoof and then picking up later with a field change request. Let's not put an early warning in and all that sort of malarkey. It's about, no, let's do it. We'll pick it up. You're happy? Does it cost me any more money? No, great. Let's just do it. And that's because it was something that no one, not even the agency or Atkins, could have predicted what Historic England wanted us to do. Said the plans have been changing all the way up to the point. We knew something may or may not happen, and it did. But collaborative approach, we got it done. We started on day, we changed it on the hoof, and then picked it up as a field change request. That's how you do it. Obviously you can do your early contractor engagement, your buildability reports. Great, but they're not going to help you, in the case of the works at Enderby. Obviously it was picked up that it was a monument and a scheduled monument, but there's only so much that we knew, and Atkins knew, and the agency knew at that point. Right team in the right place, both there and on site. The guys I put in at Kingshurst, they were the right team in the right place, and my supply chain were absolutely bang on. I had, we ended up having to bring bog mats into Kingshurst. I phoned them up at 1 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. I had them on site for 7 a.m. the next morning. When you're making those changes, you're working collaboratively. It's not about changing the design and improving it on the hoof. It's making sure that you can, as a contractor and person carrying out the works, that you can back that up. And that's I live and die by my supply chain. Anyone in Ecosulis will tell you that. And I know that if I call them up and all being well, I'll have it next day, or even at latest the day after, whether that's plant supply or whatever. that's all about overcoming the challenges that came off the back of, I mentioned in the previous slide. But it's not just about having the guys on the site as well. It's having the back office experience. I know that if I've got a problem, I can go and ask. I'm very lucky to have a back office team that that know quite a lot more than I do. And likewise, there's one of our associate directors knows even more than they do. And it's very useful having that backup. But then likewise, there's not, LinkedIn's a great tool for that. Putting shouts out on LinkedIn, because actually it's not even about Ecosulis' back knowledge and experience. It's about our collective knowledge, and bringing everyone in together. Because there's something that I might do that the guys down the road might come across but have no experience on it. At the end of the day, we're all driving towards the same goal, and that's why I think the knowledge share between us as a collective group is so big, and that's what makes stuff like the River Restoration Conference next month really, really useful. As a knowledge share. But most importantly, it's the acceptance from everyone that the works that you're in, the works you're doing, is very dynamic. As I saw at Enderby, the water rose very quickly, and that's just the way it is. And I think for the most part, most people accept that it's a fairly dynamic situation that you're working in. But there are always clients that maybe do question, or don't accept that you're working in a very dynamic situation. But it is what it is. So for me, in summary, my feeling is, it's about slowing the flow and then changing the generality of the channels. We get that, we improve the water quality, we reduce the flood risks, and we will increase biodiversity. And at that point, I will leave you with an interesting quote from The Economist that I feel is fairly relative to what I've been chatting about for the last 40 odd minutes. So I shall leave you that. And if you've got any questions, hopefully you put some in the chat box. If not, no worries. And thank you very much for your time.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Nick. I think it's great to see as well. I think those changing opinions in the community as well. I think that community engagement piece is just really important for the work that we do, and probably for the work that most of you do on the call as well. Thank you all for your questions and really kind of insightful comments as well. I'm going to start from the top. So the first question we had was from Lottie, who I'm not sure if she's still around. So I'll just read them off, Nick, and just if you could answer them, that would be fantastic.
Yep. I'm desperately taking some water on at the moment.
We'll let you do that, Nick. I'm supposed you're allowed after your great presentation. So the question from Lottie is, what about the methane production of wetlands and that having larger, longer lasting effects than carbon as a greenhouse gas?
Oh, that's a question and a half. Yes, they do produce methane. There is definitely, there's no arguing about that. But I think, I think the offset, everything produces something else, and it's a case of what is what is the bigger issue at the moment. And I think, with climate change, the drive of increasing temperatures, or to reduce increasing temperatures, I think we kind of have to find a balance between what's right and what's wrong, and what's produced and what's not produced. And I don't think, it's almost, it's almost like robbing Peter to pay Paul. And I think, it's almost something that we have to accept if we want to try and control carbon, because I don't think, I'm not aware, as I said, I stand corrected. I don't pretend to know it all, but I think it's probably an acceptable one to play, I think, in my opinion. Hopefully I answered the question. If not, give me a shout. We'll have a conversation.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nick. The next question comes from Zach from the University of Sheffield. How effective can wetlands be in soil regeneration, remediation? Are they effective at all?
They're very effective. Generally speaking, when if you're flooding an area within a floodplain, you're using the floodplain for what it's there for. You're capturing the silts. Obviously you will lose some of the silts when the water back drains out, but a lot of the sediment will stay, and that sediment will then, it's very nutrient heavy. So depending on what you want to do with those floodplains post a flood event, that sediment will be there to create the soil, and improve the soil, the dynamics of that floodplain as it floods out and then drains out again. I think that's it.
Brilliant, thanks, Nick. And we've got another one from Zach, actually.
He's busy today, isn't he?
He is very busy. It's fantastic. In deeper and faster flowing rivers, what is the best way to clean the water from a standpoint of such a huge amount of water flowing through at once?
Sorry, what was that last question?
From a standpoint of such a huge amount of water flowing through at once.
Right.
Did you get the start of that, Nick?
No.
I'll start again. In deeper and faster flowing rivers, what is the best way to clean the water?
Deeper and fast flowing waters. Generally speaking, I mean, obviously, for years we've been damming and weiring rivers and streams that have been too deep for various different reasons. I'm not a big fan of that. I generally speaking, if it's too deep, then generally speaking, my advice to people is don't do it. Go out of the area. If that area is X number of meters deep, just go. I can't do anything here. You can do stuff to it, but at what cost? And if you've got bucket loads of money, then cool, great, crack on. Personally, my advice, because a lot of the NGOs and stuff, don't look at that bit of river. Move it further upstream or downstream, and do lower impact works there rather than in a deep channel. That's my But then that said, Attenborough Nature Reserve, it wasn't cheap for the agency back then. You could do a floating reedbed thing, but then you have a depending on where it is, in the location, have you got the access? Is it going to be used by the members of the public? Can you secure it? All of those things. So you can do stuff in deeper water. I just generally say leave it, do something up or downstream that's got a little bit more less velocity and less depth.
Right, thanks, Nick.
Right.
Another question from Alyssa Swanson. So 440 wet woodland trees were planted. How did you choose what species to plant?
They were designed by they were picked and selected by Atkins as a designer. I didn't have, obviously we reviewed that as part of our buildability. They were all salix, as I said, a salix species, and I didn't see a reason to question them. And was more than happy to, given the surrounding areas. There was a bit of wet woodland off to the side at Croft, that was very similar, so it kind of fitted in with the landscape that was already there. So each tree species, when I've got involvement in the design and buildability, that I will look to, if I can change it, improve it, I will. Interestingly, you talk about wet woodland trees. We put a tender in a couple of months ago, and one of my sale points on that was to use black poplar, and use female black poplar. So get a couple of males, a couple of females, cool, and try and use that to re-establish the black poplar population in the area. So, you know, it's about using your knowledge, looking around the surrounding areas, and then deciding what's best for that situation.
Great. Thanks, Nick. We've got 3 questions. I think we should just about be able to get them all in.
I'll try and keep my answer short this time.
That was what I was trying to say, Nick. Thank you.
Thanks.
So the next question is from Jack Helsby. What species of marginal plants do you select for planting at sites such as Attenborough? Is this dependent on the site and soil?
No, not really. I mean, yeah, my favourite plant, as everyone in the company will tell you, is purple loosestrife. My mixes always have purple loosestrife in them. They're not particularly great for bioengineering. Certainly not as good as Carex and Phragmites, but I generally will always have a purple loosestrife in there. You know, generally speaking, you've got to consider what you're trying to do with your marginal planting. If you're looking to do for it to be attractive, great, get your purple loosestrifes in there and whatever. But if you want it to do bioengineering, you need to get your bioengineering species in there, your Carexes and your Frags. You know, they will bind the soils. They will bind into the bank. So it just depends on your application and what you're trying to achieve out of it. But generally speaking, you've got your standard species, your standard mixes, purple loosestrifes, your Carex, your Iris pseudochoruses, your Phragmites, your Menthum aquatica. There's probably 20 or so plants that I will pick and choose from. It just depends on the application that I'm trying to achieve.
Great stuff. Thanks, Nick. Yep.
No
there's 2 questions from Tanya, but I don't think we'll get time for both. So I'll just do the question from Tanya and then there's one from Bronwyn. So the question from Tanya is, are there any monitoring outputs that evidence invertebrates and other responses with regards to wetland hydrological flows and constraints?
There probably is. The best person for you to probably speak to is one of our directors, Alan Feast. He's a professor at the University of Bristol. He loves his inverts. He also loves his slime molds, but that's, we'll leave that. There probably is some research out there, but I haven't seen it, so sorry about that. But if you want to speak, drop me an email, and I'll put you in touch with Alan. I'm sure Alan, you'll love Alan.
Great, thanks, Nick. And the question from Bronwyn is, hi Nick, how are the plants translocated in the wetlands in patches? How do you ensure that they do not float away?
So you saw 2 different examples there. One we used where we wrapped them in hessian. So you lay the hessian out, excavate the reed mass and the root mass, place them in the hessian, tied it all up, then floated it across, and then just move the whole lot off the pontoon. At Vale Lake with that big amphibious excavator, it was literally a case of excavating and moving, and what you're relying on is the weight and the volume of the root mass to hold them in place. Generally speaking, I won't move. You can translocate plugs as well, but you just got to make sure they're properly dug in. But generally speaking, it's volume and mass and weight that you're using to hold them in place. And it's also where you translocate them to. You want them into slacker water because you want them to spread. So that's kind of, you're using nature to help itself effectively. Hopefully that answered the question, Bronwyn.
Thanks, Nick. And we've had quite a few more questions kind of coming in, but with 3 minutes left, I don't think we're really going to get time for them. I think Nick's ready for a lie down as well. So what I'll do, for those of you who haven't answered questions 2, I will follow it up in the follow-up email. Make sure you kind of get responses to those questions. As we said, we have recorded the webinar today, so I will send a link out to you all via email with that in answer to your questions. We'd also really value your feedback as well for today, and I'll pop a couple of questions in that email, so if you have got a chance to answer them, that would be fantastic. We do also have 2 other webinars, one next week and one on the 31st, so we'd love to see you all there as well. If you'd like any further information, or if you've got any additional questions post-event, please feel free just to drop me an email. Really looking forward to speaking to you all further on the subject. And thanks again to Nick, you did a fantastic job. You can go and have a lie down, a break and some lunch now.
Thanks.
Hope to speak to you all again soon. Take care and have a fantastic weekend. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Cheers, all.